Some lives do not break all at once. They wear thin, like a shirt cuff rubbed by years of washing, until one morning the smallest kindness can tear the whole heart open. Out on the Nebraska prairie, where the wind could find a crack in any wall and make itself at home, folks learned that love was not always a lantern in the window. Sometimes it was only a coal stove, waiting for someone brave enough to strike a match. Maeve Pritchard stepped down from the freight wagon with her carpetbag in one hand and a blue china teacup wrapped in newspaper tucked against her ribs, the last unbroken thing from her mother's parlor back in Pennsylvania. Dust blew across the Turner yard in pale sheets, catching in her traveling skirt and stinging her eyes. The house ahead of her stood gray and wide under the hard Nebraska sky, its porch sagging, its windows dull, its woodpile nearly gone. At the doorway stood a man she had promised, by letter and necessity, to marry. Elias Turner was taller than she expected, with shoulders made by fence posts and winter chores, and a face that looked as if smiling had once belonged to him, but had been put away in a locked drawer. Beside him and behind him, half hidden like wary barn cats, were 8 boys, 8 sons. Maeve knew the number. It had been written plain in Mrs. Abel's letter from the Ladies' Aid Society. Widower, sound character, ranch in need of a wife, 8 children. But ink on paper had not prepared her for the sight of them. Their bare knees nicked, their sleeves too short, their eyes fixed on her carpetbag as if it might hold bread. The smallest boy had a tum in his mouth and a cough in his chest. One of the middle boys clutched a tin soldier with no head. The eldest stood stiff as a young fence rail, trying to look like he had no need of anyone at all. Elias removed his hat. Miss Pritchard, Mr. Turner. The words hung between them like a gate neither one wanted to open first. Before either could say more, a crash sounded from inside the house. A boy cried out, another cursed under his breath, and the smell of scorched cornmeal drifted through the doorway. Elias closed his eyes for half a second. "That'll be breakfast," he said. Maeve tightened her grip on the blue cup. She had crossed half the country to become a wife to a stranger. She had imagined awkward vows, cold sheets, hard work, and a town full of women, measuring her worth by the hem of her dress. She had not imagined beginning by walking straight into smoke. She stepped past Elias before he invited her. Inside, the kitchen was chaos held together by hunger. A blackened skillet smoked on the stove. A bowl of cornmeal had tipped across the table. Yellow grits scattered like sand. 2 boys stood nose to nose, each accusing the other. A little one sat on the floor with tears cutting tracks down a dirty face. Another boy, thin as a willow switch, tried to scrape burnt moss from the pan with a bent spoon. The eldest boy followed close behind her. "We don't need help." Maeve looked at him. His jaw trembled though he clenched it hard. "What's your name?" "Caleb." "How old?" 14. "Then you are old enough to know when a pan is ruin." His eyes flashed. For a moment she thought he might hate her on principle, and perhaps he already did. Maeve set down her carpetbag, unpinned her hat, and laid the blue cup on the table where no elbow could knock it off. Then she rolled up her sleeves. To anyone listening from a warm kitchen somewhere far from that Nebraska wind, tell me where you are watching from tonight. And if this story finds a tender place in you, like it, share it, and subscribe so another lonely heart might find its way here too. Now let us step back into that smoky kitchen. "First," Maeve said, "open that window." No one moved. She pointed to the second boy, a red-haired child with freckles like pepper across his nose. "You," he blinked. "Name's Silas. Silas, open the window." "Caleb, take that pan outside before the smoke settles into every curtain, though I see there are no curtains to ruin." "You there with the spoon." The thin boy froze. "Your name?" "Jonah." "Jonah, fetch water." "Not a sip, a bucket." The smallest one coughing needs it set to boil. The boy with the headless soldier whispered, "That's Toby. He's always coughing." "Toby, then." Maeve softened her voice without making it sweet. Toby needs warm water and a cloth. The youngest on the floor stopped, crying long enough to study her. Elias stood in the doorway watching, his hat still in his hand, as if some force had halted him at the threshold of his own kitchen. Maeve glanced once at him. "Mr. Turner, if there are eggs, I need them. If there is milk, I need to know how sour. If there is flour, I need it on this table." One of the boys snorted. "There are no eggs. Hens hide from us." Maeve turned toward him. He was about 11, broad-mouthed, defiant, with hair sticking up in every direction. "And you are? Levi, show me where they hide." He stared. "The hens, the eggs." His mouth opened, then shut. He looked to Elias, but Elias only gave a slow nod. Within 5 minutes, the Turner kitchen changed from a battlefield to a working place. Not a clean place, not yet. Smoke still lingered. The stove gave off a sour, burned smell. The table was scarred, sticky in places, and crowded with chipped plates. But Maeve had found flour in a sack tied with baling twine, salt in a wooden box, half a crock of lard, and, thanks to Levi's suspicious pride, 6 warm eggs hidden in the hay behind the feed bin. She did not ask why 8 boys had been left to cook for themselves. She did not ask how long it had been since a woman's hand had scrubbed that table. She did not ask why Elias Turner looked at the empty chair near the stove, as if it might accuse him. Questions could wait. Hunger could not. The smallest boy, Toby, sat near the hearth with his thumb back in his mouth, watching her from under lashes clumped with sleep. Near him sat another little boy, perhaps 5, named Amos, who would not speak at all. He kept touching the pocket of his shirt where something flat and square had been tucked away. Later Maeve would learn it was a button from his dead mother's dress. There were 8 of them, and by the time she had their names straight, the biscuit dough was coming together beneath her hands. Caleb was the eldest, proud and raw-boned, with a scar across one eyebrow and grief hardened in duty. Silas came next, 12 and quick with jokes he used like a knife. Levi was 11, suspicious, always hungry, always ready to fight over the last piece of anything. Jonah, 10, was quiet and narrow-shouldered, forever putting broken things in his pockets to mend later. Ben, 8, watched doors and windows as if someone might leave through them. Peter, 7, stuttered when frightened and hummed when doing chores. Amos, 5, kept his mother's button. Toby, 3, coughed and clung to shadows. 8 boys, 8 needs, 8 small storms gathered around one rough table. Maeve had cooked in boarding houses after her father's debts swallowed their home. She had stretched one chicken into 3 meals, made coffee from grounds already used, and coaxed flavor from bones that had little generosity left in them. The East, as folks called it out here, had not been marble halls and silk gowns for her. It had been a seamstress needle, a ledger full of red ink, and the quiet shame of a woman with no dowry and no roof that could not be taken. She cut the biscuits with the rim of a tin cup because there was no cutter. She fried the eggs soft for the youngest and harder for the older boys. She found a jar of molasses, nearly empty, and warmed it so the last inch would pour. When the food reached the table, silence fell so quickly it startled her. The boys did not lunge, though their bodies wanted to. They looked at Elias first, he said. "Go on." Then the meal vanished in pieces. Levi tucked half a biscuit under his thigh until Maeve saw him. "You afraid someone will steal it?" she asked. His chin came up. "My beer." She took the biscuit, split it, spread a thin shine of molasses over both halves, and put them back on his plate. "There, now you have 2 pieces to guard." Silas laughed once before catching himself. Levi stared at the plate, as if she had performed a trick he could not trust. At the far end, Caleb did not eat until Toby had his egg mashed with biscuit. Maeve noticed. Elias noticed Maeve noticing. "You have coffee?" she asked Elias. In the tin by the stove, she poured it black and bitter, set 1 cup by him, and took none for herself until the boys had eaten. Elias looked at the cup as if he had forgotten coffee could be handed to a man without a demand tied to it. "This is not a wedding breakfast," he said quietly. "No," May answered, wiping flour from her wrist. "It is only breakfast." He lifted his eyes. "You expected better. I expected different." A corner of Silas' mouth moved. Caleb's head came up. The little ones kept eating. Elias swallowed the words he might have said. He had written for a wife because the church women told him his sons were running wild, because the school teacher said Amos fell asleep on his slate, because Toby's cough frightened him in the night, because Caleb had turned into a man too young, and because his own hands could mend fences and doctor calves, but could not break comfort into a house. He had not written for love. He had not believed in that kind of mercy since Mary Turner was laid under prairie sod with a fever that took her before dawn. Maeve knew only the outline. Widower, 8 sons, honest, needs help. Marriage expected upon arrival if both parties agree. Those last 5 words had carried her through every depot and cold bench between Pennsylvania and Nebraska. If both parties agree. By mid-morning, after the dishes were stacked and Toby's cough eased with steam under a towel, Elias asked her to walk outside. The boys pretended not to listen. Even Amos, silent as dust, crept near the open window. Elias led Maeve to the porch. Wind moved over the prairie grass beyond the yard, bending it in long waves. A team of horses stood by the corral, tails flicking. The barn roof showed 2 missing shingles. Somewhere a hinge banged and banged. "I won't hold you to it," Elias said. Maeve looked at him. The promise, the letters. Mrs. Abel meant well, but she made this place sound. He glanced back at the house. She made it sound less broken. She wrote that you had 8 sons. She did. She wrote that your wife died. His jaw tightened. She did. She wrote that you needed a practical woman. I need more than that. His voice roughened. That is the trouble. For the first time since stepping down from the wagon, May felt the ache in her legs, the grit beneath her collar, the heaviness of being measured by a man who was not unkind, but was afraid. She was 31 years old. In Philadelphia, a woman of 31 with no fortune was pitied to her face and dismissed behind her back. Here, she had been offered a name, a roof, and 8 pairs of eyes that had watched her make breakfast as though breakfast itself were a miracle. "What are you offering instead?" she asked. Elias frowned. "A ride back to town. Money for a train ticket as far as Omaha. From there." He reached into his vest and drew out a folded envelope. "It is not much. I can send more after cattle sale." Maeve stared at the envelope. Pride rose first, hot and sharp, then fear, colder and more honest. "I have $7, she said. "A carpet bag, 1 blue cup, 2 dresses fit for work, 1 fit for church if no one looks too close, and a letter saying I am expected here." He lowered the envelope. "I do not want to be bought, Mr. Turner. Not by desperation, not by pity, not by a promise made before either of us knew the smell of the other's kitchen." A faint flush crept up his neck. "That was not my meaning. I know." She looked out across the yard where Levi was pretending to chase a hen while clearly listening. "But I'm not leaving today." His eyes moved back to her. Maeve. It was the first time he had used her given name. It landed between them with a strange weight. She gripped the porch rail. We'll set terms. I will stay in the small back room, if you have one. We will not marry until I have had time to see this place plainly, and you have had time to decide whether you can bear me in it. I will work for room and board. If, after 1 month, either of us says no, you will pay my fare to Omaha and write a respectable account of my conduct so I might seek work." He stared at her as if she had spoken law in a kitchen apron. "And if after 1 month neither of us says no," he asked, "then we speak to the preacher. A long silence passed. The hinge kept banging. "That room leaks," Elias said. "Then someone must mend the roof." For the first time, not a smile exactly, but something tired and almost living crossed his face. "Yes," he said, "someone must." The back room was hardly a room. It had once held tack, old seed sacks, and a cradle with one broken rocker. Dust lay thick on the floorboards. A narrow bed frame leaned against the wall with no mattress. There was a small window facing the kitchen garden, though no garden remained, only hard dirt and weeds gone gray. Maeve stood in the doorway and took in her kingdom. Behind her, Ben whispered to Peter, "She ain't gonna sleep there." Maeve turned. "Why not?" Ben flushed. "Snakes, my bay." Peter nodded solemnly. "And rain comes in. Drip, drip, drip. Then I will need a pan." Amos peeked around Peter's sleeve. His hand closed around the button in his pocket. The boys watched as Maeve shook out seed sacks, swept dust into a pile, and asked for a bucket of water. Jonah returned with one before any other child moved. He had found a brush too, its bristles half worn. "For scrubbing," he said. "Thank you, Jonah." His thin face colored at being thanked. By sundown, the room held a straw tick Elias dragged from the loft, 2 blankets beaten clean on the porch rail, her carpet bag under the bed, and the blue china cup on the windowsill. The cup did not belong in such a room. That was why she set it there. Some things had to declare survival. At supper, she made beans with onion, corn cakes, and coffee stretched thin. Levi ate 3 helpings and looked ashamed after the third. She gave him a 4th before he could steal from Toby's plate. Caleb watched with narrowed eyes. "You feed him like that? He'll never stop." Maeve passed the beans. "Children stop when they trust there will be another meal." The table went still. Elias set down his fork. Caleb looked away first. That night, behind the thin wall of her room, Maeve listened to the Turner house settle into uneasy sleep. A cough from Toby, a murmur from Peter, the creak of Elias walking the porch long after the lamps were out. At home, if she could still call any place that, the night had held carriage wheels, church bells, voices below boarding house windows. Here the dark was enormous. It pressed against the glass and filled the spaces between coyote cries. She took her mother's teacup from the sill and held it in both hands. Blue flowers circled the rim, faded but delicate. Her mother had sipped from it on mornings when creditors waited in the parlor and still managed to say, "Maeve, we do not become less ourselves because others see us brought low." Maeve whispered into the cup, "I am trying." From the other side of the wall came a soft knock. She froze. "Miss Pritchard." Elias's voice was low. "You awake? You awake?" "Yes." Toby's coughing again. "I know it's late." She set down the cup and opened the door. Elias stood in lamplight wearing shirt sleeves, suspenders loose, hair damp from washing. In his arms, Toby lay limp with sleep and fever, cheek flushed against his father's shoulder. Maeve's irritation vanished. "Bring him to the stove." They spent the next hour over steam and flannel. Maeve found dry horehound in a jar, old but usable, and brewed it with molasses. Elias held Toby upright while she coaxed spoonfuls between his lips. "You have done this before?" Elias asked. "My younger brother had weak lungs." "Had?" She stirred the cup though nothing needed stirring. "He died at 9. Elias said nothing. His hand, broad and scarred, moved over Toby's, back in slow circles. Maeve watched the motion. "You are gentle with him." His eyes did not lift. "I was not gentle enough with the others." That was all he said, less than it meant. By morning, Toby's breathing eased. Maeve dozed in a chair and woke to find a coat over her shoulders. Elias's coat. It smelled of hay, horse, wood smoke, and a little rain. On the table beside her sat coffee, still warm. She wrapped both hands around the cup and did not smile, not where anyone could see. The month began to fill itself with work. Maeve rose before dawn. Elias was already outside most mornings, a shadow moving between barn and corral. Caleb went with him, trying to match a man's stride. Silas hauled water if asked twice, and complained once. Levi fed the hens, but checked the nest for eggs with the zeal of a bank guard. Jonah mended chair rungs, harness straps, and the cracked handle of Maeve's carpet bag without being told. Ben kept near the kitchen door, unwilling to be far from where food was made. Peter sang wordless tunes to Toby. Amos remained silent, though sometimes he stood beside Maeve while she kneaded bread, watching her hands as if language might be hidden in flour. The first week, the boys tested her. Silas put a frog in the flour bin. Maeve carried it outside, placed it in his hat, and said, "A creature deserves shade if it's to spend the day with you." Levi lied about washing behind his ears. Maeve held up a damp cloth and waited. He glared, then surrendered his ears like a prisoner. Caleb refused seconds even when hungry, so Maeve began leaving an extra biscuit near the coffee pot after supper. The first 2 nights it disappeared while no one admitted touching it. The third night, Caleb muttered, "Could use more salt," but he ate it. Ben hid crusts in his pocket. She found them while washing and said nothing until she noticed him feeding them to a half-starved dog that lurked near the barn. The dog had one torn ear and ribs showing. "What is his name?" Mae asked. Ben looked frightened. "He ain't ours." "What is his name?" Ben swallowed. "Moses. 'Cause he come out of the weeds." Then Moses will need a pan of scraps if he is expected to stay biblical. Ben's face broke open. With hope so sudden, Maeve had to turn away. At the end of the first week, she hung flour sack curtains in the kitchen. They were plain, hemmed with small, even stitches. But when the afternoon sun came through them, the whole room softened. Elias stopped in the doorway when he saw them. "Too much?" Maeve asked. He shook his head. "No." He touched one curtain edge, then seemed embarrassed by the act. "Mary had blue curtains," he said. Maeve's hands stilled in the dishwater. "I can take them down." "No." His voice came too fast. Then quieter. "No, let them stay." That evening, he repaired the leak above her room without being asked. The town of Mercy Creek sat 6 miles east, a cluster of false fronts, hitching rails, a church bell, a dry goods store, a bank, and enough tongues to keep every sorrow alive, longer than necessary. Elias took Maeve there on the second Saturday because she needed lamp oil, needles, calico, and a bolt of muslin if any of the boys were to have shirts that reached their wrists before winter. They rode in the wagon, Maeve on the bench beside him, Caleb and Silas in back with egg crates. Elias had washed and shaved. Maeve wore her church dress, dark brown with a mended cuff, and her hat trimmed with ribbon that had known better years. At the dry goods store, Mrs. Hattie Bell looked Maeve up and down before saying, "So you're the Eastern woman." Maeve set a sack of beans on the counter. "I'm Maeve Pritchard." For now, Hattie's smile was thin. "Folks say you came to marry Elias Turner. Folks also say no vows have been spoken." Elias, near the flour barrels, turned. Maeve felt every ear in the store lean toward her. The old shame tried to rise, the boarding house whispers, the pity, the way women with husbands looked at women without them as if misfortune might stain. She counted out coins. "Folks are busy," she said. "It is kind of them to manage my calendar." Caleb coughed to hide a laugh. Silas did not bother hiding his. Hattie flushed. "I only meant a household with children needs respectability." Maeve looked at her then. "Children need food, clean socks, sleep, and an adult who does not discuss them over Cracker Barrels. Respectability can wait its turn." A silence fell sharp enough to cut thread. Elias stepped beside her, placed one more coin on the counter, and said, "The muslin too." Hattie blinked. "All of it. All she needs, outside." Maeve loaded the wagon without looking at him. Elias came around the horse. "You should not have had to answer her." "No, I should have spoken first." Yes." He took that like a deserved blow. After a moment she added, "But you spoke second. That is better than never." He leaned one hand against the wagon board. "Maeve, I have lived so long with people saying what they please about my house that I stopped hearing it. That is a luxury children cannot afford. His gaze moved to Caleb and Silas, who were pretending to argue over egg money, but listening with all their might. You are right, he said. That was another thing Maeve had not expected from Elias Turner. He could be stubborn as a root in hard ground. He could vanish into silence until a person wanted to throw a plate, but when truth struck him square, he did not dodge it. On the ride home, he stopped at a rise overlooking the prairie. The wind lifted the loose hair at Maeve's temples. Below them, the Turner land spread rough and sun-brown, creek-line, dark with cottonwoods. Cattle small as spilled buttons. Bank holes the north pasture, Elias said. Maeve turned. What? I borrowed against it when Mary took sick. Doctor from Lincoln. Medicines, then burial, then feed after the drought. He kept his eyes forward. Payment comes due after cattle sell. If prices fall, I lose it. Why, tell me now, because if you are measuring this place, you should know where the cracks are. She looked at his profile, the hard line of his jaw, the weariness he had not earned all at once, but carried all the same. And if I leave, then you leave knowing the truth? The horses shifted. Silas sneezed in the wagon bed. Caleb told him to hush. Maeve watched the grass bow under wind. My father kept his cracks behind polished doors. By the time I saw them, the whole house had already fallen. Elias looked at her, but she said no more. That night, Maeve opened a small leather book she carried in her carpet bag. It had been her father's ledger, not the official one, with numbers arranged to soothe creditors. This was the private one, where Maeve had learned the ugly shape of debt, interest, inventory, loss, and desperate hope. She took a pencil stub and began making columns by lamplight. Flour, beans, coffee, feed, cloth, bank, eggs, butter if the cow freshened, repairs, cattle sale. Jonah appeared in her doorway with a broken slate. Can numbers save a pasture? He asked. Maeve looked up. Sometimes numbers show where the pasture is leaking. He considered this. Can I see? She let him sit on the floor near her trunk. His hair fell into his eyes. He watched her write, as if she were mapping buried treasure. After that, Jonah became her silent assistant. He counted eggs, weighed flour sacks, measured beans, and made small careful marks when calves were born. Maeve discovered he had a gift for figures. He discovered that his quietness did not make him invisible to her. The second week brought rain. It came cold and slanting from the north, turning the yard to black mud and the road to Mercy Creek into a ribbon of ruts. The boys were trapped indoors, which made the house shrink by half. Toby's cough returned. Peter cried when thunder cracked close enough to rattle the stove lid. Amos hid under the table, both hands over his ears. May crouched beside him with a quilt. Thunder cannot get under quilts, she said. He stared at her. It is a known fact. A small hand crept out, took the quilt, and pulled it over his head. By evening, Elias and Caleb had not returned from the far pasture. Supper sat warm on the stove. Rain hit the windows with thrown gravel force. Maeve stood at the door, lamp in hand, listening. Silas tried to sound careless. They know rain, Levi said. Pa knows everything. But his voice cracked. Ben stood near the stove, one hand on Moses' head. The dog had been allowed into the mudroom only, a compromise Maeve had negotiated after finding Ben asleep against him in the barn. At last, through the rain, came the sound of hooves. Maeve stepped on to the porch before she thought better of it. Elias rode and bent low, leading Caleb's horse. Caleb slumped in the saddle, face pale beneath rain and mud. Get blankets, Maeve ordered. Silas ran. Levi froze until she clapped once. Levi, the fire. Elias carried Caleb inside. Horse slipped crossing the wash. His leg, table, Maeve said. They laid Caleb on the kitchen table where, 2 weeks before, he had glared at her across burned breakfast. Now his teeth chattered so hard he could not speak. His trouser leg was torn, blood dark at the knee. Maeve cut the cloth with her sewing scissors. Caleb groaned, tried to sit, and Elias pressed him down. Easy. Caleb grabbed his father's sleeve. Don't let her. Maeve leaned close. Caleb Turner, if you kick me, I will forgive you once, because you are hurt. The second time I will sit on you, despite the pain. Silas barked a laugh. Caleb's mouth twitched before another groan took him. The bone was not broken, thank God, but the gash was deep and packed with dirt. Maeve washed it while Elias held the lamp, his face gray with helplessness. You have done this too? He asked. Boarding house men cut themselves on factory work, kitchen girls burn their arms, children fall through ice. The world is generous with wounds. Caleb hissed as she poured whiskey over the cut. Sorry, she said, and meant it. He gripped the table edge until his knuckles whitened. When she bandaged him, his eyes were wet with pain and humiliation. Don't tell, he whispered. Maeve tied the cloth. Tell what? That cry? She looked at his young face, trying so hard to be stone. I saw no such thing. His mouth trembled. Elias looked away toward the stove. After the boys slept, Elias found Maeve washing blood from her hands at the basin. Rain still beat the roof. Water dripped somewhere into a pan in her room despite the patch. You saved his leg from turning bad, he said. I cleaned a wound. I froze. She dried her hands slowly. No, you held him. Elias leaned against the wall, suddenly older than he had seemed that morning. Caleb was 10 when Mary died. I told him he was the man of the house while I went to fetch the undertaker. I thought I was giving him courage. Maeve folded the towel. When I came back, he had dressed the little ones for church. Toby was still nursing then, crying so hard he had no sound left. Caleb had him in his lap, trying to feed him milk with a rag. Elias' voice lowered. He has not been 10 since. The house breathed around them. Rain, stove, sleeping boys. Maeve said, children will carry what we hand them, even if it breaks their backs. Elias closed his eyes. She regretted the sharpness, but not the truth. I don't know how to set it down for him, he said. Start by taking it from his hands when he offers it. The next morning, Caleb woke to find Elias in the kitchen frying bacon, badly but earnestly, while Maeve mixed batter. Caleb tried to sit up on his cot near the stove. I can help. Elias did not turn. No, but chores. I have chores. The little boys have. Maeve. Caleb's eyes flicked to her, wary. Elias came to him with a cup of water. Your work today is healing. Caleb looked as if he might argue, then saw something in his father's face that stopped him. Yes, sir, he muttered. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was a plank laid across a creek. As days passed, the house learned new sounds. The scrape of chairs pulled close for lessons after supper, the thump of bread dough, the swish of a broom under beds, boys laughing without turning guilty afterward, Toby's cough easing, Moses barking at coyotes from the porch as if appointed sheriff. Maeve wrote chores on a slate and pinned it by the door. Caleb protested order until he realized order meant he no longer had to remember everything. Silas groaned, but did his share faster than anyone. Levi guarded the pantry, then slowly stopped hiding food. Jonah kept accounts. Ben collected eggs with reverence. Peter learned to split kindling small enough for the stove. Amos still did not speak, but he began following Maeve into the yard when she started a kitchen garden with seeds found in an old tin. Too late for most, Elias said, leaning on a hoe. For most, Maeve agreed. Not for radishes. He studied the little patch she had turned behind the house. You are stubborn. So I have been told by men who confuse surrender with femininity. He looked at her then, and the laugh that escaped him was rusty but real. She felt it in a place she did not name. At the end of the 3rd week, the preacher came. Reverend Tull was a kind man with nervous hands and a wife who had sent a jar of peach preserves, but not visited in person. He sat in the parlor, which was really a front room with a Bible, 2 chairs, a trunk, and a rug beaten nearly colorless. "I understand," he said carefully, "that arrangements remain unsettled." Elias stood near the mantel. Maeve sat with mending in her lap. Every boy had found a reason to be within hearing distance. "For now," Elias said. The preacher looked at Maeve. "Are you comfortable here, Miss Pritchard?" The question was decent. It undid her more than Hattie Bell's gossip had. "I am treated with respect," Maeve said. Reverend Tull nodded. "And the marriage?" A needle paused in cloth. Elias answered before she could. "Will not be pressed." Caleb looked sharply at him. Maeve kept her eyes on the mending. The words should have comforted her. Instead, they opened a hollow space. After the preacher left, she went to gather sheets from the line. Wind snapped them hard enough to sting her wrists. Elias followed after a minute. "I meant what I said," he told her. "I know I won't press you. I hurt." He took one corner of a sheet before it dragged in the dirt. Together they folded, stepping close, then apart, then close again. "Maeve," she looked up. His eyes were troubled. "You have made this house livable. That does not oblige you to live in it." The sheet billowed between them like a white wall. She said, "And you have made sure I know I can leave." "Yes, do you want me to?" His hands tightened on the cotton. There it was, the sentence that had been walking around them for days. Elias looked toward the barn, the pasture, anywhere but at her. "Wanting has not served me well." "That is not an answer." "No," he said. "I do not want you to leave." The wind moved the sheet. For one suspended breath, they were hidden from the house, from the boys, from the whole wide prairie. Maeve's voice came quieter than she intended. "Then stop offering me the door as though it is kindness." He looked at her fully. From the porch, Silas shouted. Ben put a frog in Levi's boot. The sheet dropped between them. Maeve closed her eyes. Elias sighed. "Duty calls," he said. Despite herself, Maeve laughed. The almost laughter between them did not make things easy. In some ways it made them harder. They became aware of small distances. His hand near hers at the pump, her shoulder brushing his sleeve when they passed in the hall. The way he said her name when he found coffee left warm for him after a long ride. The way she noticed whether he had eaten. Still, there were boundaries. Her room remained her own. He slept in the small room off the front, where a rifle hung above the door, and Mary Turner's old shawl lay folded in a trunk he never opened. The boys understood without being told that Maeve was not yet their mother, not yet their stepmother, not quite a hired woman, not merely a guest. Children, being honest in ways adults fear, made their own names. Toby called her May because he could not manage Maeve. Peter called her Miss M. Levi called her Boss when irritated. Amos called her nothing at all, but he began leaving pebbles on her windowsill. Smooth ones, white ones. One shaped like a heart, though she did not mention it. One afternoon near the end of September, Maeve found Elias in the barn loft holding a small wooden horse. It had once been painted red. Most of the paint had worn away. He seemed startled, almost guilty. "I was looking for harness leather," she said. He turned the horse in his hand. "I carved this for Caleb when he was 4. It is fine work. Mary painted it." His tone moved over the faded back. "She said every boy needed something red in winter." Maeve climbed the last rung and stood beside him, hay dust warm in the slanting light. "You loved her very much?" "Yes." The answer came simply, without apology. Maeve nodded, though something inside her tightened. Elias looked at the little horse. "For a long time, loving her felt like proof I could not offer anything honest to another woman. Then you came into the kitchen and told Levi children stop when they trust another meal is coming." She said nothing. "I have been feeding grief like it was loyalty," he said. "Maybe it is not below them. A cow load." The barn smelled of hay, dust, animals, and sun-warmed boards. Maeve touched the edge of a hay bale, not him. "My father left me his debts," For years I thought paying them meant I was honoring him. Then I understood I was only staying chained to a sinking thing. Did you pay them? Some, not all. Shame flickered, old but still alive. I came west because there was nothing left to sell except my willingness to begin again. Elias turned toward her. Maeve. She smiled without happiness. There now, cracks on both sides. He held her gaze, still standing. It was a simple sentence. It reached her more deeply than comfort would have. That evening she found the red horse washed and set on the mantel. Amos stood before it for a long time. Then he reached into his pocket, took out his mother's button, and laid it beside the horse. No one spoke. Elias turned away, but not before Maeve saw his eyes. The outside world returned through a man named Victor Rusk. He arrived in a polished buggy with brass fittings, wearing a city coat too fine for prairie dust. Maeve saw him from the kitchen window and felt the air change before Elias came in from the barn. Banker, Caleb said from the doorway. Rusk owns notes all over the county, Elias muttered. Victor Rusk stepped down as if the yard itself owed him apology. His smile was clean, his boots cleaner. Turner, he called. Fine day. Elias wiped his hands on a rag. Rusk, Maeve, stood on the porch, Toby against her skirt, Amos behind her. Rusk's eyes moved over her. The boys, the curtains in the window, the dog under the steps. Household improvements, he said. I hear congratulations might soon be in order. Elias did not answer. Rusk smiled wider, or perhaps not. Hard for a man to manage 8 sons in courtship with a banknote coming due. May felt Caleb stiffen beside the porch post. Elias's voice stayed level. State your business. Your cattle sale will not cover enough if prices remain low. I am prepared to extend terms. Rusk removed his gloves finger by finger, in exchange for formal transfer of the North Pasture deed now. You my lease grazing rights for a season. That pasture is half my water access. It is also half my risk. Maeve listened. The ledger in her mind opened by itself, columns forming. Elias said, sale is not for 2 weeks, and weather turns, cattle die, buyers cheat, men miscalculate. Rusk glanced at Maeve. Women from the East often dislike uncertainty. It would be unfortunate if Miss Pritchard found herself attached to a failing place. Elias took 1 step forward. Maeve put a hand on Toby's head. Mr. Rusk, she said. What interest rate did you apply after the doctor's loan was folded into the feed note? Rusk blinked. I beg your pardon. The interest rate. That is bank business. I am asking out it. His smile thinned. Miss Pritchard, Frontier Finance is hardly suitable porch conversation. Maeve descended 1 step. Debt is always porch conversation when a man brings it to the porch. Caleb stared at her. Jonah appeared behind the screen door, eyes wide. Rusk gave a soft laugh. Turner, your intended is spirited. Elias's face darkened, but Maeve spoke first. My spirit has nothing to do with arithmetic. The banker's eyes cooled. He turned back to Elias. Come to my office by Friday. Sign, or I begin proceedings after the due date. Good day. His buggy wheels cut neat lines through the yard as he left. Silas muttered a curse and did not get corrected. That night, Maeve asked Elias for every paper, every note, receipt, bank notice, doctor bill, feed invoice, cattle agreement, and tax record. He brought them reluctantly in a tin box dented at one corner. You should not have to trouble with this, he said. Do you wish to keep your pasture? Yes, then I will trouble. They worked at the kitchen table after the boys slept. Lamp smoke curled upward. Elias sat across from her, silent and tense. Maeve read each page, made columns, checked figures, and frowned. Near midnight she tapped 1 line with her pencil. He charged interest twice. Elias leaned forward. What? Here. The doctor's loan was added to the main note in March. Interest accrues separately through my, then again as part of the combined principal. That is double counting. He said it was standard. It is theft. Wearing a clean collar, Elias stared at the paper as if it were a snake. Can we prove it? With his own documents. For a moment, hope moved across his face so nakedly that Maeve looked away to spare him. Then he said, "Why do you know this?" The question was not suspicious. It was careful. Maeve placed the pencil down. My father borrowed from men like him. Later, I kept books for a shipping office. Men trust women with ledgers when they think numbers are too dull to matter. Maeve, I should have told you more. You tell what you can when you can. She looked at him across the lamp-lit table. Yes, that what you believe? It is what I'm learning. Something passed between them then. Not romance as songs tell it. Not a kiss, not a vow. Something steadier. A door unlatched from both sides. The next day, however, fear found its way back in. Maeve walked to town with Jonah beside her, carrying the copied figures in her reticule. She intended to speak with Reverend Tull's wife, who had once worked in a county clerk's office. But in Mercy Creek, Hattie Bell saw her enter the bank first. By noon, the town had invented a story. By afternoon, it reached the ranch ahead of her. Caleb met her at the yard, face white with anger. You went to Rusk? Maeve stopped, dust on her ham. Jonah behind her clutching the slate. I went to examine the public filing on your father's note. Hattie says you asked Rusk about a ticket east. Maeve felt the blood leave her face. Jonah whispered, "She didn't." Caleb looked at him. You hush. Elias came from the barn, hearing voices. Caleb turned on him. She's leaving. I knew it. They all do. Ma did. The words struck the yard silent. Elias flinched as if slapped. Maeve stepped toward Caleb. Your mother did not leave you. She died. Same thing, Caleb shouted. Toby began to cry on the porch. Ben picked him up, scared. Amos vanished behind the rain barrel. Caleb's face crumpled and hardened again in the same breath. You'll go too. You'll fix the books and cook breakfast and make them need you. Then you'll go. Maeve's own old wound rose fierce. She wanted to defend herself, to say she had nowhere to go, to say she had crossed a country and scrubbed their floors and held their fevered child. But she saw that Caleb was not speaking only to her. He was speaking to a grave, to a father's absence, to every morning he had woken too young. So she said, yes. Everyone stared. Yes, I could leave. That was the agreement. Her voice shook, but she kept it clear. And if I stay only because you are afraid, that is not love. That is another kind of prison. Caleb's eyes filled. Elias moved toward his son, but Caleb backed away. Maeve reached into her reticule and pulled out a folded paper. I went to town to find whether Mr. Rusk filed the combined note legally. He did, but he counted interest twice. This paper might help save your pasture. She held it out. Caleb did not take it. The wind lifted dust between them. Finally, Elias stepped forward and took the paper. Caleb turned and ran toward the barn. That night he did not come to supper. Elias carried a plate out, but returned with it untouched. Maeve stood in the kitchen, staring at the uneaten beans, feeling suddenly foolish for thinking meals could mend everything. The boys were quiet. Even Silas had no sharp words. After dishes, Maeve went to her room. She took the blue cup from the sill, wrapped it in newspaper, placed it in her carpet bag, then removed it again. Her hands trembled. She could leave before they sent her away with their eyes. Leave before a child's fear became a man's resentment. Leave before Elias Turner's quiet need became something she could not survive losing. She folded one dress, then another. A knock came. She did not answer. The door opened a hand's width. Elias stood there. Do not go tonight. It was not a grand speech. It was 6 words, low and rough. Maeve closed her eyes. He stepped no farther. Caleb is wrong to wound you because he is wounded. I will tell him so. But do not go tonight. She gripped the dress. And tomorrow, decide after breakfast. A laugh broke from her, small and painful. Everything in this house waits on breakfast. His mouth softened. Since you came? Yes. She looked at him then. He seemed frightened, not of cattle prices or bankers or storms, but of her carpet bag. I am tired of being useful, she whispered. Elias absorbed that. His eyes moved over the swept room, the mended curtain, the blue cup, the folded dress. You are not dear to us because you are useful. The words entered the room quietly, but they changed its shape. Maeve pressed a hand to her mouth. Elias looked down. You are dear. That is all I know how to say. She wanted to cross the room. She wanted to remain where she was. She did both in her heart and neither with her feet. At last she said, I will stay tonight. He nodded once, as if accepting a mercy he did not deserve. In the morning, Maeve rose before dawn and made breakfast, not because she was surrendering, not because she had been hired by hunger, because the house was full of boys who had to eat before grief could speak sensibly, and because she herself needed the steadiness of flour, heat, coffee in hands. She made biscuits high and golden, fried potatoes with onion, eggs gathered by Ben, coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and possibly bankers. She set molasses in the center of the table and put an extra plate at Caleb's chair, though he had not come in. The boys gathered slowly. Silas sat first, subdued. Levi watched the door. Jonah kept his slate on his lap. Ben fed Toby bice. Peter hummed under his breath. Amos held his mother's button tight. Elias entered last, face drawn from little sleep. Caleb? Miaf asked. Barn. She nodded. They waited. Food cooled. No one complained. At last, footsteps sounded on the porch. Caleb came in with hay on his shirt and shame in every line of him. He stopped when he saw the full plate. Maeve lifted the coffee pot. Sit before the potatoes, lose patience. His face twisted. I said things, he whispered. Yes, I meant them when I said them. I know, I don't mean them now. Maeve poured coffee for Elias, then milk for Toby. That is how anger often behaves. Caleb remained standing. I'm sorry, Miss Pritchard. Silas stared at his plate. Levi's mouth hung open. Elias looked at his son with something like grief and pride braided together. Maeve gave Caleb a biscuit. Sit down. He sat. Then Amos, who had not spoken since Maeve arrived, pushed his chair back with a scrape. Everyone turned. The little boy walked to Maeve, opened his fist, and placed the old button in her palm. For you, he said. The room stopped breathing. Elias's chair creaked. His face went white. Maeve looked down at the button, smooth from months of being held by a child who had no words big enough for loss. She knelt slowly so she was level with Amos. This was your mama's. He nodded. You do not have to give it away. His lower lip trembled. Not away. No one moved. Maeve closed her fingers around the button. Tears blurred the flour dust on her hands. Then I will keep it safe, she said. Amos stepped forward and leaned against her shoulder. That breakfast changed everything, though no one said so while eating. It changed in the way Caleb passed Maeve the molasses without being asked, in the way Elias sat with both hands around his coffee, watching Amos breathe against her sleeve, in the way Levi did not hide a biscuit, in the way Toby crawled into her lap afterward and fell asleep with egg on his chin. It did not make Maeve a wife. Not yet. It did not erase Mary Turner from the house or wipe debt from the land. It did not silence Mercy Creek or soften Victor Rusk's ambition. But from that morning on, the question was no longer whether Maeve belonged only by agreement. It was whether the world would let them keep what had begun. Rusk made his move 3 days later. He posted notice at the bank and at the dry goods store that Elias Turner's note was deficient and foreclosure, Proceedings would begin if payment was not made in full by the end of cattle sale week. He dismissed Maeve's copied figures as female misunderstanding. He suggested, where men could hear and women could repeat, that Elias had been led into embarrassment by a desperate Eastern spinster hoping to secure property through marriage. The words reached Elias at the blacksmith's. They reached Maeve through Mrs. Tall, whose indignation was so great she forgot to be timid. "They are saying you trapped him," the preacher's wife whispered in the churchyard, "that you came with debts, that your father—" Maeve's spine went straight. "What of my father?" Mrs. Toll's face crumpled. "Oh, my dear." By sunset, Maeve knew. Rusk had wired east. Somehow he had found record of Horace Pritchard's bankruptcy, the unpaid debts, the auction of their house, the whispers that he had hidden assets though none had ever been found. He had taken her shame, nailed it to Elias's gate without needing paper. Maeve stood in the kitchen holding a kettle, hearing Mrs. Toll's words again. A desperate Eastern spinster, debts in the blood, trapped him. Elias came in just before dark. One look at her and his face changed. "You heard? Yes? The boys? Not all. Caleb knows enough." He took off his hat slowly. "I am going to town." "To you do what?" "Speak to Rusk. With your fists." His silence answered. Maeve set down the kettle. "That would prove every word he once said about you. I will not let him drag you through mud. He already has." "Mud dries, Maeve." She turned on him then, anger and fear burning together. "Do you think I have never been spoken of? Do you think Eastern parlors are kinder than Western stores? Men like Rusk count on women folding under shame. I will not fold." Elias came closer but stopped before touching her. "What do you need?" It was the right question, so right that it unsteadied her. She looked at the table, the ledger, the copied figures, the boys' plates stacked for supper. "I need the original bank papers. I need Reverend Tull, Mrs. Tull, and anyone who has paid Rusk a combined note. I need Jonah's copies checked twice. I need Caleb to ride to the county clerk at first light with you. And I need you not to strike that man unless he lays hands on one of these children." A slow, fierce light entered Elias's eyes. "Yes, ma'am." The next days passed like a storm with no rain. Maeve worked with figures until her eyes burned. Jonah sat beside her, copying clean columns in a hand more careful than any clerk's. Elias and Caleb rode to the county seat and returned with filings that confirmed Rusk had used the same interest language in 4 other loans. Reverend Tull agreed to witness. Mrs. Tull, who had once been a clerk indeed, found the legal phrase Maeve needed. Silas and Levi took over more chores without complaint. Ben kept Toby quiet when Maeve's head ached. Peter brought kindling. Amos left 3 pebbles by her ledger, then 1 small radish from the garden, split by frost, but brave. On the morning of cattle sale, Mercy Creek filled with wagons, horses, buyers, dust, and the smell of animals. Men gathered near the stock pens. Women moved between store and church tables selling pies and coffee. Boys climbed fences until shouted down. The bank stood white-fronted and smug at the corner. Elias brought his cattle in leaner than he wanted but healthy. The price offered was poor, not ruinous, but close. Rusk arrived before noon. He stood near the pens with his watch chain glinting. "Turner," he called, loud enough for listeners. "Ready to settle?" Elias looked at Maeve. She stood beside Jonah, carrying the tin box. Her dress was plain, her hat older than fashion, her gloves mended. In her pocket lay Amos' button. In her reticule, her father's ledger. She had brought it not because it proved Rusk wrong, but because she was done being haunted by the shame of numbers. Elias stepped into the open. Yes. The crowd shifted. Rusk smiled. Good. The bank will accept transfer of North Pasture with lease rights as discussed. No, Elias said. Rusk's smile cooled. Maeve moved forward and opened the tin box on a crate. You counted interest twice. she said, her voice carrying more clearly than she expected, not only on Mr. Turner's note, on Mr. Abel's seed loan, Mr. Price's livery note, the Dawson widow's mortgage, and perhaps others. A murmur passed through the crowd. Rusk laughed. "This is absurd." Mrs. Tull stepped up, pale but steady. I examined the filings. Reverend Tull stood beside her. I asked, "Did I?" Rusk's face darkened. "A preacher and a mail-order bride do not constitute a court." "No," Maeve said. "But the county judge might find arithmetic useful." She handed Elias the copies. He turned, not to Rusk, but to the men gathered by the pens. "I owe money," he said. "I do not deny it. I borrowed for my wife's doctoring, for feed, for burying, for keeping my sons alive. I will pay what I owe." He looked then at Rusk. "But I will not pay what you stole." The words landed hard. Rusk stepped forward. "Careful." Elias did not move. "No, I've been careful for years. Careful not to anger the bank. Careful not to shame my sons. Careful not to need more than I could carry. Careful nearly cost me my land and the good name of a woman who did nothing but feed hungry children and read numbers better than you hoped." Maeve's throat tightened. Rusk turned toward her. "You think marriage to this man will cleanse your father's name?" Elias moved then, but not with fists. He stepped between Rusk and Maeve, putting his body before her without hiding her. "Her name needs no cleansing." The crowd quieted. Elias removed his hat. His voice lowered, but everyone near heard. "Maeve Pritchard came to my house when there was smoke in the kitchen and hunger at the table. She stayed when offered a ticket away. She gave my sons order without stealing their mother's memory. She found theft in papers I was too tired and ashamed to read. If any person here speaks her name with insult again, speak mine with it and see whether I answer." Maeve looked at him, tears burning behind her eyes. Rusk sneered, "Touching, but unless money appears by sundown, sentiment does not satisfy debt." Maeve reached into her reticule. Her fingers closed around the small leather ledger from her father. She had planned only to carry it, not to use it. It was the last record of ruin, the last proof that she had not imagined the fall. Inside its back cover, stitched beneath torn lining, was a bank draft her father had hidden and never cashed. Maeve had discovered it years too late to save their home, and had kept it because she could not bear the thought of spending the final dishonest secret of a man she loved and resented. It was not enough to pay Elias's full debt, but with the corrected interest, with cattle sale money, it might bridge the gap. She took it out. Elias saw the paper and frowned. "Maeve, my father hid this," she said quietly. "I thought keeping it meant I had not forgiven him. Perhaps using it means I have." He understood at once. "No, yes, that is yours. It was never truly mine." She looked at the 8 boys clustered near the fence. Caleb rigid, Silas bright-eyed, Levi clutching the rail, Jonah holding his slate, Ben with Toby on his hip, Peter pressed close, Amon's watching with solemn trust. "And I am tired of saving relics while living children go hungry." Elias's eyes shone. "Maeve, I cannot let you buy my land. You are not letting me buy land." He placed the draft in his hand. "You are letting me choose where I stand." He stared down at it. His hand shook once. Rusk snatched for the paper, but Caleb stepped forward, sudden and fierce. "Don't touch her." He was only 14, tall, yes, and hardened by chores, but still a boy. Yet in that moment, he stood not as a child forced to be a man, but as a son protecting someone he had chosen. Rusk stopped. Too many eyes watched now. By sundown, with Reverend Tull and 2 cattle buyers as witnesses, the corrected debt was calculated. Elias paid with sale money, Maeve's draft, and a promissory balance small enough to be honest. The north pasture remained Turner land. The Dawson widow, hearing what had happened, demanded her papers be reviewed. Then Abel, then Price. Victor Rusk left the sale before dark. his buggy wheels throwing dust, his clean boots finally dirtied. No one cheered. Frontier justice seldom arrived like church bells. It came in tired signatures, angry murmurs, and one man's grip loosening from another man's throat. Maeve stood behind the church after it was done, suddenly emptied of strength. The sky burned orange over the prairie. Her mother's blue cup was miles away on a windowsill. Amos' button pressed against her palm in her pocket. Elias found her there. For a while they watched the sunset without speaking. "You gave too much," he said. "So did you when you offered me fare you could not spare. That was different." "No." He turned toward her. "I do not want a marriage built on debt. Neither do I. I do not want you bound because you saved us. I am not." He searched her face, needing to believe and afraid to. Maeve took a breath. "When I came, I thought marriage might be a roof. Then I thought it might be a bargain. Then I feared it was only another place to be useful, until I wore out." She looked toward the road where the boys waited by the wagon. "But this morning, Amos asked if I would sit beside him at supper." "Nah, cook it." "Sit," Toby cried when I went out of sight. Caleb apologized, though it cost him pride. Jonah showed me numbers with his hands shaking, because he wanted to help save home. "And you, her voice caught. Elias waited. "You stood in front of me without silencing me." His eyes softened. She continued, "I do not know if that is what love begins as, for people like us. But I know I would like to find out without a clock set to 1 month." The last of the sun lit the side of his face. "I love Mary still," he said. "I know, I believe I always will. You should." His breath trembled. "And I love you differently, not instead, not because the house needs you, not because my sons reached for you. I love you because when you are in a room, truth stands straighter." Maeve covered her mouth, but the tears came. He did not touch her until she reached for his hand. His fingers closed around hers, rough and warm, and neither pulled away. They were married the following Sunday in the church at Mercy Creek. Not with grandeur. There were no satin ribbons, no organ beyond Mrs. Tull's uncertain playing, no feast beyond what the women brought and what the boys guarded with great seriousness. Maeve wore her brown dress, with new cuffs sewn from the muslin Elias had bought. In her pocket, she carried Amos' button. At her throat she wore a small blue ribbon the color of her mother's teacup. Elias wore his black coat brushed clean. Caleb stood beside him holding Toby, who fell asleep before the vows. Silas tried to look bored and failed. Levi cried and denied it. Jonah kept the ring in a small carved box he had made from scrap walnut. Ben had washed Moses and tied a string around the dog's neck, despite being told dogs did not attend weddings. Peter hummed through the first prayer until Mrs. Tull smiled at him. Amos stood at Maeve's side, one hand in hers. When Reverend Tull asked who gave this woman, there was a pause. Maeve lifted her chin. "I give myself." The preacher nodded, eyes warm. "Fen gladly." Elias's vow was quiet. Maeve's was steady. Their hands met between them, not as strangers fulfilling letters, but as two weathered souls choosing the work ahead. Afterward, Hattie Bell approached Maeve outside the church. Her face was tight with discomfort. "Mrs. Turner," she said, stumbling a little on the new name. "I spoke wrongly." Maeve looked at her. Hattie swallowed. "About you, about the children. I am sorry." Maeve could have sharpened the moment. Once, she might have needed to. Instead, she looked toward the boys piling into the wagon, toward Elias helping Toby settle, toward Amos showing his pebble collection to Mrs. Tull. "Then speak rightly next time," Maeve said. Hattie nodded. The ride home was noisy. Boys shouted over one another. The wagon rattled. Moses barked at every bird, and Elias glanced at Maeve so often she finally said, "Watch the road, Mr. Turner." Silas groaned. "They're married and she still calls him Mr., Elias said. "I expect she will call me worse by winter." Mea smiled. Only if you deserve it. At home, they did not enter a transformed house. The porch still sagged, the barn still needed shingles, the north wind still found cracks, debt still existed, though lighter. Grief still had its chair by the stove, but there were curtains in the kitchen, radishes on the sill, bread cooling under a cloth, a repaired fence line visible beyond the yard where Elias and Caleb had worked together, not as master and burdened child, but as father and son. In Maeve's room, no longer only hers, the blue cup sat on the windowsill, and beside it lay a red wooden horse, a white pebble, and one old button. That evening Maeve made breakfast for supper, because Toby asked, and because everyone laughed at the idea. Biscuits, eggs, potatoes, coffee, molasses, and the last of Mrs. Tall's peach preserves. The table was crowded beyond comfort. Elbows knocked, Peter spilled milk, Levi reached for the biggest biscuit, and then, after a struggle visible on his face, gave it to Amos. Caleb noticed and said nothing, which was kindness. Jonah counted plates and whispered that they would need a longer bench before winter. Ben slipped Moses a crust under the table. Silas said, if dogs could attend weddings, they ought to do chores too. Elias sat at the head of the table, but not like a lonely man holding a place against ruin. He sat with Toby against one knee and Maeve at his right hand, her sleeve dusted with flour, her hair loosened from its pins, her face tired and lit from within by the lamp glow. Before eating, Amos stood on his chair. Everyone quieted. He looked at Maeve. Mama May. The room held still, tender, and afraid. Maeve's eyes filled, but she smiled. Yes, Amos. He pointed to the biscuits. You get first. No sermon ever spoken in Mercy Creek carried more grace. Maeve took the smallest biscuit. Elias saw, broke his own in half, and put the larger piece on her plate. She looked at him. He said, only eat. So she did. Outside, the Nebraska prairie darkened under a sky full of early stars. Wind moved through the grass, over the repaired fence, past the barn, around the house that still bore its scars and would bear them for years. Inside, the stove burned warm. 8 boys leaned into the safety of a meal that would come again tomorrow. A man who had once mistaken silence for strength listened to the voices around him as if they were rain after drought, and a woman sent from the east to marry a stranger found, now at once but piece by piece. That home was not the place waiting perfect at the end of sorrow. Home was the table you kept setting, the hand that stayed, the coffee left warm, and the heart brave enough to be chosen in the morning.